context for this declaration is that advances in medical science and technology have posed interesting challenges as well as threats to an understanding of the need for truly humane health care. The challenges are opportunities that come for new drugs and new procedures to relieve suffering and to prolong life. And yet, at the same time, there are threats that arise out of the secularization of European and North American culture, where institutions and academics have seen more and more of a utilitarian and God-forsaken approach to what it means to live. As governments have been under threat from various problems and opportunities, we've seen a change in the way in which governments have supported what we Christians believe to be humane health care in the public sphere. That context means that there are huge challenges that have to be faced for Christians who want to maintain our commitment to life, our commitment to the quality of life, and to human dignity, and to provide that in as many places as possible. And so I think this declaration that we're about to sign provides a sort of moral framework that gives support to you all who are actually doing the work. There are also intellectual challenges. As these changes in technology and medical science come, there are philosophical and theological and scientific questions to be asked about what's right, what's wrong, how do you resolve the conflicts that have been generated by this new period of time. I think in addition to the scholars who are present, to the institutional philanthropists and governing bodies that are present, the church has a role, because it's only as we talk about our deepest values, as we remember what God has revealed to us through the scriptures and what the church has learned through centuries of reflection, that as we set the context for those values, that we can then marshal the support of money, of policies, and institutional strength to implement those values to make a difference. But I hope in signing this declaration that I and the Roman Catholic officials who are part of this are providing a theological and moral context that will allow those of you who actually do this work to have the support you need to do it well and to resolve the issues that are in front of all of us. While we applaud medical science for advances to prevent and cure disease, we recognize that every mortal life will ultimately end in death. For a Christian, death is not a hopeless adventure. It is the door of life that opens to eternity. It is the experience of participation in the mystery of Christ's death and resurrection. Because Christian faith is relevant to every aspect of life, no one should be expected to cope with life's pain, suffering, and ultimate death without the help of God through other people. Care for dying persons is part of our stewardship of the divine gift of life when a cure is no longer possible. Holistic and respectful care of the person must promote the uniquely human and Christian dimension of dying as the fundamental objective. This approach to death requires compassion and professionalism on the part of psychologically and emotionally competent healthcare workers. With regard to the use of medical technology at the end of life, as human interventions, medical technologies are only justified by the help that they can provide. Their use requires responsible judgment about when life-sustaining treatments truly support the goals of human life and when they have reached their limits. When inevitable death is imminent despite the means used, it is permitted in conscience to make the decision to refuse forms of treatment that would only secure a precarious and burdensome prolongation of life, so long as the normal care due to the sick persons in similar cases is not interrupted. Even when staving off death seems futile or unreasonably burdensome to continue, we must continue to offer comfort care, effective pain relief, companionship, and support for the patient in the hard and sacred work of preparing for death. The rejection of euthanasia. For the healthcare worker, to serve human life means to respect it and care for it without hastening its end. The human person is not the master of life, but its faithful steward. Indeed, human life is a gift from God, and therefore it is inviolable and not arbitrarily disposable. Neither can the healthcare worker consider himself or herself an arbiter over either life or death. The Catholic tradition and the United Methodist tradition oppose euthanasia, that is, the taking of life, as an offense against God's sole dominion over life, an abandonment of hope and humility before God, and an affront to the dignity of and the solidarity among human beings. For medical science, it marks a backward step of surrender, as well as an insult to the personal dignity of the one who is dying. With regard to the nurturing community, death is an event that introduces one into God's life, a revelation that manifests the word of truth. It is therefore necessary to give an evangelical meaning to death, proclaiming how the gospel can enlighten and support the dying person. We recognize the agonizing personal and moral decisions faced by the dying, their physicians, their families, their friends, and their faith community. We emphasize that decisions faced by the dying be made with thoughtful and prayerful consideration by the parties involved, with medical, pastoral, and other appropriate counsel. This is a pastoral duty of the ecclesial community to all its members, according to each one's responsibilities. Spiritual and pastoral care. The highest form of humanizing the dying process that healthcare and pastoral workers can offer is providing a faith and hope-filled presence. The pastoral care of the sick consists in spiritual and religious assistance. This is a fundamental right of the patient and a duty of the church. Because of the necessary interaction between the physical, psychological, and spiritual dimension of the person, and the duty of honoring their own faith, all healthcare workers are bound to create the conditions by which religious assistance is assured to anyone who asks for it, either expressly or implicitly. The social responsibility of providing care. The duty to care for the sick calls us to reform the structures and institutions by which health and spiritual care are delivered when they fail to provide the comprehensive physical, social, emotional, and spiritual care needed by those facing grave illness and death. Absence of comfort care can leave people with a distorted choice between enduring unrelieved suffering and isolation and choosing death. This choice undermines rather than enhances our humanity. We as a society must assure that patients' desire not to be a financial burden does not tempt them to choose death rather than receiving the care and support that could enable them to live out their remaining time in comfort and peace. The promotion of palliative care. We encourage palliative care to support and provide companionship during illness and at the end of life. The basic philosophy of palliative care is to achieve the best quality of life for patients suffering incurable progressive illness, even when their illness cannot be cured. Palliative care is a healthcare specialty that is both a philosophy of care and an organized, highly structured system for delivering care. Palliative care services are critical for realizing the most ancient mission of medicine, to care even when it cannot cure. Palliative care is an expression of the truly human devotion to taking care of one another, especially of those who suffer. We should encourage professionals and students to specialize in this type of assistance, which is no less valuable though it may not be considered life-saving. Palliative care accomplishes something equally important. It values the person. Conclusion, proclaiming the good news. God has continued love and purpose for all persons, regardless of health. Pope Francis encourages, I especially ask Christians and communities throughout the world to offer a radiant and attractive witness of fraternal communion. Let everyone admire how you care for one another and how you encourage and accompany one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. Quoting John 13:35. As the Catholic Church and the United Methodist Church, we reject euthanasia and any pressure upon the dying to end their lives. We encourage and support the concept of palliative care in all places and for everyone. We affirm laws and policies that protect the rights and dignity of the dying. We commit to advocate, identify, and address instances where proper care for the suffering and dying is unavailable due to scarcity of resources, unhealthy ideologies, and oppressive conditions. We commit to train pastors and pastoral caregivers in the issues of bioethics, as well as in the techniques of compassionate companionship for those who are suffering and dying. We commit to educate and equip Christians through preaching, resources, and adult education programs to consider treatments for the suffering and the dying in the context of Christian affirmations of God's providence and hope. Signed, Bishop Scott Jones, Archbishop Vincenzo Paglia.